The fluorescent lights of the City Heights Police Precinct lobby were a sterile, buzzing white, a stark contrast to the growing unease felt by Aisha Reed. She was a black woman, pulled aside and summarily dragged toward the station's restricted access wing by two officers, Sergeant Donovan and Officer Finn. She had merely been attempting to inquire about a lost item, but the officers, citing a vague need for identification verification, had isolated her. She had barely protested before the nightmare truly began. The bathroom door slammed shut behind her, the tile walls forming a cold, echoing cage. Before Aisha could utter a single word to ask why she was being detained, Donovan, the heavier of the two officers, shoved her against the wall with such brutal force that her shoulder slammed against the ceramic, sending a shockwave of pain through her. He snarled, his breath smelling of stale coffee, about respecting authority. Finn, the thinner officer, stood by the door, a cruel smirk twisting his mouth. In the next horrific instant, Donovan seized the collar of Aisha's simple, long-sleeved top and pulled her halfway off her feet. With his other hand, he drew his service pistol. The cold, black metal was pressed first against her cheek, then brutally nudged toward her trembling lips. Tears welled in her eyes, not from guilt, but from the raw, sickening humiliation and fear of being utterly powerless. She had done nothing wrong. Nothing but be a black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, targeted by men who saw a badge as a license for cruelty. Yet, even as the gun scraped her teeth, she refused to scream. Aisha Reed had been trained her entire life to stay composed under unimaginable pressure. She was trained to assess danger and survive. This was because the man she shared her life with was General Marcus Thorne, one of the most decorated and strategically brilliant commanders in the U.S. military, a man whose methods were studied by global intelligence agencies. These officers, however, saw only an easy target. As the officer leaned in, spitting his venomous threats, Aisha's mind raced. She realized she could not reveal her identity. To utter her husband's name now would be to invite a media spectacle, turning her assault into a twisted political headline. She would endure. She remembered Marcus's low, firm voice. Panic is how they win. That maxim became her anchor. With the cold metal pressing her lips, she forced her eyes to remain open, her spine rigid against the wall. She knew the officer's arrogance was their Achilles heel. Every second they brutalized her was a second closer to the implosion of their careers. The silence of a general's wife was not weakness. It was the quiet, terrifying prelude to a reckoning. The suffocating silence of the bathroom was broken when the officers decided to parade their victim. They dragged Aisha out by the arm, jerking her so roughly down the hall that her feet slipped on the polished floor. She stumbled, but her instinctual, disciplined movements allowed her to catch herself without fully falling, a detail too subtle for the officers blinded by their own power. They shoved her into a small, grimy interrogation room with peeling paint and a buzzing, failing light. When she hit the metal chair, Donovan slammed his fist against the table, trying to make her flinch. She didn't. Her steady, defiant gaze met his. Unsettling him for a fleeting moment, he quickly masked with aggressive barking about resisting arrest. Aisha understood this was a power ritual, a twisted game these men played with countless victims who lacked the means to fight back. Unlike their usual prey, she was calculating. She noted the unplugged security camera, the subtle dents on the table that spoke of past violence, and a nervous, shared glance between the officers, clear signs of a practice cover-up. Finn, the thinner officer, tried to intimidate her with proximity, resting his hand on her thigh in a sickening act of dominance. A fierce, controlled surge of fury ignited inside Aisha. She wanted to use the self-defense training Marcus had given her, to snap his wrist and flip him. But she held still. Any violent reaction would be twisted, giving them the escalation they craved. She simply and silently pulled her leg away, and the flicker of frustration in his eyes was her first small victory. Donovan slammed the door and began to shout a barrage of invented crimes. Loitering, harassment, resisting. She felt a monumental, controlled rage building, but she kept it locked down, knowing that patience was her true weapon. She simply waited for the moment when these petty tyrants would see the stars on her husband's uniform and their smugness would dissolve into raw, paralyzing horror. Finally, she whispered one simple sentence. "I want to make a phone call." The room went still. The air shifted. Her tone was not that of a victim pleading, but of a commander issuing an order. The unnatural control in her voice made both men hesitate. a seed of doubt finally taking root. Donovan, irritated but unnerved, finally left the room to check with his sergeant. Aisha noticed the tremor in his hand as he grabbed the doorknob, while Finn paced nervously, twirling his baton and muttering baseless threats. Aisha held her ground. She tilted her head, studying him with the same detached, clinical evaluation Marcus had taught her to apply to military threats. The gesture made Finn freeze. He felt, for the first time, assessed, measured, and predicted. Donovan returned, his face a mask of anxious irritation, falsely claiming the sergeant had refused the call. But Aisha saw the lie in his eyes. They were trying to isolate her, to cover up their crime. Yet their cover-up was already failing 2 floors below. A civilian clerk, named Marissa Chun, driven by an unshakable moral duty, had witnessed the aggressive detainment. She secretly checked the visitor log, and the name Reed Thorne made her blood run cold. She recognized it instantly. Trembling, Marissa slipped into a supply closet and dialed an emergency military contact number. Miles away, in a secure briefing room, General Marcus Thorne glanced at his vibrating phone. When he heard a terrified stranger whisper, "Sir, your wife, she's in danger at the City Heights police station," a terrifying transformation occurred. Marcus Thorne did not panic. He strategized. He moved. Within seconds, he was barking orders into his radio for immediate deployment of military police. Back in the interrogation room, the 2 corrupt officers were shouting their final, desperate threats, completely unaware that the floor beneath them was metaphorically beginning to shake. They were moments away from drowning in the consequences of their actions. The growing commotion outside reached a crescendo, snapping their confidence like a dry twig. The door burst open with a crash, and uniformed military police flooded the room, weapons drawn. Donovan and Finn froze, their bravado evaporating as General Marcus Thorne stepped through the entry. His uniform was impeccable, and his eyes burned with a silent, controlled fury that was infinitely more dangerous than any violence they had displayed. He walked past the stunned officers without a glance, going straight to his wife and gently untying her restraints, his hands trembling with suppressed rage. "You're safe now, Aisha," he whispered, before turning to face the 2 men who had brutalized her. The entire room stiffened, anticipating the explosion. Marcus spoke just one sentence: "Arrest them." The room erupted. Donovan and Finn were slammed to the floor, handcuffed, and dragged out screaming pathetic excuses no one heard. As General Thorne escorted his wife out of the station, a commanding figure leading his queen from a conquered territory, the building fell into a nervous silence. Federal investigators were already seizing files and preparing charges that would not just end 2 careers, but dismantle an entire, hidden chain of corruption within the department. Stepping into the daylight, Aisha realized that the officers, in their arrogance, had mistaken silence for weakness. They had never understood the source of her true power. Real power wasn't the gun in a bully's hand. It was the quiet, relentless force that comes when justice finally opens the door, and those who declared a silent war are finally forced to face the reckoning they never prepared for.